My name is Jane Hurlbut Foster. I'm an Evanston housewife. This afternoon, I want to tell you a story about a baby who was adopted 34 years ago. I know the story very well because I was the baby. Mrs. Florence Walrath found me for her sister, and in doing so, she began to think about the many problems of adoption. When other childless couples she knew asked her to help in finding babies for them, her ideas began to crystallize. As a mother herself, well aware of the special care babies need, she became convinced that adopted babies require a period of even more careful attention. She thought, too, about how babies and parents might be most ideally matched to each other, and she worked out a practical plan. 9 years after Mrs. Walrath had arranged my adoption, she founded the Cradle Society, America's unique adoption nursery in Evanston, Illinois. Today, more than 5,000 babies later, the Cradle begins its 26th year. And, since I figured, even though indirectly in its founding, I have the privilege of calling the Cradle roll throughout America on this Silver Jubilee. I'm calling first Mr. and Mrs. Walter G. Cowan in New York.
Present, Mrs. Foster.
Yes, and we remember the Cradle as it was 23 years ago. Just a small brick house in the suburbs of Chicago with only a few babies in the nursery. I remember looking at those babies and wondering if one of them might be the baby we were searching for.
It was 6 months, though, before Mrs. Walworth called us to say she'd finally found a baby whose history matched up pretty well with ours.
I had wondered why Mrs. Walworth wanted so many details about us. Everything from our ancestry and religion to the color of our eyes. But when we went to the parents' room at the Cradle, and when the nurses brought in the baby, I had the strangest, most wonderful feeling that this was my baby.
Penn is 23 years old now, and our pride and delight in him have grown through the years.
He's studying to be an architect now, and he's ready to answer the roll call from Ithaca, New York. Penn, how are things at Cornell?
Everything's fine, Mom and Dad. You know, I wish I really could express my gratitude today to you and the Cradle. The Cradle gave me you, and you've given me 23 years of love, care, and devotion. Fighting the Battle of the Bulge was easy compared to telling you how I really feel. All I can say is, thanks a lot for everything you've done. And I'd like to send my greetings to all other Cradle children, especially to a young man in Washington, D.C., age 10 months. His parents are answering the Cradle roll today, too. So it's Ex-Corporal Cowan saying over and out to Brigadier General and Mrs. Milton Arnold in Washington, D.C.
Roger, Corporal Cowan.
Yes, it's a real pleasure to have this chance to send our greetings to Mrs. Florence Walworth, who found us our dear son, Wiley. I only wish she could see him now.
That's right. Healthiest baby you ever saw.
The way he's grown and thrived is certainly a tribute to the Cradle Nursery. There's room there now for 48 babies, and there's a staff of doctors and nurses in constant attendance. But along with all this attention to physical well-being, the babies are treated with such tender affection. It's no wonder they leave the Cradle with a wonderful start towards being just the babies their new parents dreamed of.
Now, a Cradle grandfather who also happens to be president of the Chicago Board of Health, Dr. Herman N. Bundesen.
As a grandfather, of course, I'd like to talk about the accomplishments of my own Cradle grandchild. But it's even more important and anxious am I to acknowledge the Cradle's accomplishments in the field of infant health. Back in 1927, an epidemic of gastroenteritis was killing babies all over the country. The epidemic didn't spare the cradle, so Mrs. Walrath called in one of the nation's top research specialists, Dr. Gladys Dick. Dr. Dick worked at the cradle till she found a way to prevent this epidemic. Infant mortality at the cradle has now been reduced to an almost unbelievable 1%. And it's lower everywhere, lower because of the fine work done there.
And Dr. Bundesen, you could hardly hope to see 6 healthier children than the cradle children of Dr. and Mrs. Robert Wheelahan of Elm Grove, Wisconsin. They are all here in Chicago to answer the cradle roll.
Yes, we're a healthy family and a happy one. You see, we followed Mrs. Walrath's advice and told our children they were adopted. They've known ever since they were old enough to understand that Dr. Wheelahan and I chose them.
That's right. And they know we couldn't possibly love any children any more than we do them. Dick?
Well, I was just going to say, it was pretty smart of the Cradle to find us just the parents we wanted, and we were too little to do it ourselves. Right, Patsy?
Right, Dick. I'm awfully grateful to the Cradle and proud of being an adopted child.
Me too.
All present, you see, and all proud to answer the cradle roll.
It's a cradle custom to urge parents to tell a child he is adopted. The well-known child psychologist, Dr. Angelo Patry, is ready in New York to say something about that.
The Wheelahan children offer ample evidence that telling a child he's adopted is a good idea. Family life is just as full and complete, whether the children are natural or adopted. The love of parents for their children and the children for their parents is based on the happy home life they share together. It is the tender, loving care given a child from infancy that makes a child love his parents. And it is in the giving of that same care that a parent's love becomes richer through the years. Helping a child to grow to maturity in health of body, mind, and soul is a continuous and rewarding experience, the most thrilling life has to give. Foster parents are fortunate when they can experience this love of an adopted child.
And now will Hollywood answer the cradle roll. We'll give you 5 seconds to answer. Are you there, Bob Hope?
How do you, ladies and gentlemen? This is Bob, Cradle Father Hope, answering present to the cradle roll. You know, there are only 8 cradle families out here in Hollywood, so the Hopes are mighty proud to be cradle parents. I wish I could really tell you what the cradle means to us. What it means here in Hollywood, where all day long the talk is box office and Hooper ratings, autographs and premieres, and who'll get the Oscar this year. This town of make-believe, they call it. But don't get the idea everything is make-believe. Our children are real as the kids anywhere else in America. And we know we have a real obligation to them, because on them, cradle kids and all kids, the future of the world depends. Mrs. Walrath, this silver jubilee of the cradle is more exciting to me than any premiere, because I think America's greatest box office attraction is her children. Thank you so much for the cradle. May it rock forever.
Back in Chicago again to give you Mrs. Walrath's own words to cradle children. At some point in their later life, they receive a letter written as her legacy to all cradle babies, which reads in part like this.
Dear cradle child, there are many, many persons into whose loving arms we could have given you. The choice of your parents was made in the belief that they were the ones with whom lay your most probable chance for a happy, worthwhile life. A second fact you can take as certain. The woman who bore you possessed the highest qualities of motherhood, as evidenced by her willingness to sacrifice herself completely in order to give you a fair start in life. Furthermore, at this solemn moment, she decided secrecy was best for you. Your loving adopted parents accepted the situation, and now is your chance to prove yourself worthy. First, by allowing closed doors to remain closed, and then by conducting yourself through life so that all prospective parents may rejoice in the prospect of parenthood.
Sincerely yours, Florence D. Walrath.
Yes, it's Mrs. Walrath herself, the founder of the Cradle, which is celebrating its 25th birthday.
Thank you, Mrs. Foster. Hearing the voices of Cradle children and their parents is one of the most wonderful anniversary gifts there could be for me. It was to help bring such happy families into being that the Cradle was founded, and to realize we have succeeded to the extent that we have fills me with pride. My only wish is that there were more Cradles in our country, so that every little human soul born into this world would have a chance for his God-given birthright, the care of two loving, intelligent parents in a normal home and a legalized position in society. We at the Cradle believe a period of expert care is needed before a brand new baby is transferred to such a home. This interim period also provides an opportunity to check carefully through all the eager applications to find the parents who will be most suited to the baby. I have received today so much credit as founder of the Cradle that I want to say how much help and support I've needed and received from the beginning. I particularly want to thank the Cradle Board and Mr. John C. Slade, its president, and friends of babies everywhere.
Another of our Cradle fathers, Mr. James Melton, star of radio and the Metropolitan Opera, is down in New Orleans today. And there's no more appropriate way for James Melton to answer the Cradle role than to sing Brahms' Lullaby.
Lullaby and good night, with roses bedight, creep into thy bed, there pillow thy head. If God will, thou shalt wake when the morning doth break. If God will, thou shalt wake when the morning doth break. Lullaby and good night, those blue eyes close tight, bright angels are near, so sleep with no fear. They will guard thee from harm with fair dreamland's sweet charm. They will guard thee from harm with fair dreamland's sweet charm.
My sincerest congratulations to the Cradle on its 25th anniversary. May others follow the example of the Cradle until babies all over the world are given their birthright. God bless the children to whom the Cradle has returned their birthright, and bless all children everywhere.
Yesterday, the Cradle celebrated its 25th birthday in the most appropriate manner possible by giving one more baby a chance for a happy, worthwhile life. Mr. and Mrs. John G. Brooks of Chicago received the anniversary baby, a boy, the 5,409th, to go out from the Cradle nursery. Today you have been listening to some of the other Cradle parents and children all over America as they answered the cradle roll. The mistress of ceremonies was an Evanston housewife, Mrs. John Foster, the first child placed for adoption by Mrs. Walrus. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.